It's just after midnight on May 14th, 2008. A 19-year-old college student named Brandon Swanson is driving home after a night with friends. He's calm, sober, and familiar with the area. But within an hour, he'll make a desperate phone call, one that lasts nearly half an hour before disappearing into the darkness. His last words to his father are hauntingly simple. "Oh shit." And then, silence. To this day, no one knows what happened next. This is the story of Brandon Swanson, a disappearance that still confounds investigators, frustrates searchers, and haunts a quiet community in rural Minnesota. Brandon Victor Swanson was born in 1989 in Marshall, Minnesota, a small, close-knit town surrounded by open farmland and gravel roads. He was bright, friendly, and deeply interested in technology, with plans to continue studying at community college. By all accounts, Brandon was responsible and reliable. His parents, Annette and Brian Swanson, described him as independent, yet always close to family. He wasn't the kind of teenager who vanished without a word. On the evening of May 13th, 2008, Brandon attended the last day of classes at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby, about 30 miles from his home in Marshall. After celebrating briefly with classmates, he decided to drive home for the night. Sometime after midnight, Brandon left Canby in his Chevy Lumina. The drive to Marshall should have taken less than 45 minutes. He hadn't been drinking heavily. Friends said he'd had one beer, but nothing that would impair him. But sometime after leaving town, something went wrong. Around 1:15 a.m., Brandon's car veered off a gravel road into a shallow ditch. The car wasn't damaged, and he wasn't hurt, but the tires couldn't gain traction. He tried calling a few friends for help. No one answered. At 1:54 a.m., he called his parents. When his father, Brian, answered, Brandon sounded calm. He said he'd taken a wrong turn, slid off the road, but thought he was near the small town of Lind, about 7 miles from Marshall. Relieved, Brian and Annette got in their truck to come help. They stayed on the phone as they drove, flashing their headlights occasionally, hoping he might see them. But Brandon couldn't see them at all. And as the minutes passed, it became clear he wasn't where he thought he was. For nearly 47 minutes, they talked, describing landmarks, fences, and gravel roads. Brandon mentioned hearing water nearby, maybe a creek or a river. His father told him to stay put, but Brandon decided to walk toward what he thought was the town of Lind. They stayed connected by phone. Brandon said he was walking along a gravel road, occasionally mentioning distant lights in the darkness. At one point, he said he was cutting across a field, heading toward those lights. Then, at 2:17 a.m., he said, "Oh shit." The line went dead. Brian and Annette tried calling back again and again. Each call rang, then went to voicemail. They drove for hours that night, searching the roads near Lind and Marshall, calling his name, flashing headlights, hoping to see him walking. At sunrise, there was still no sign of Brandon. At 6:30 a.m., they reported him missing to the Lyon County Sheriff's Office, but the initial response was slow. Deputies assumed he'd wandered off or needed time alone. After all, he was 19. But Annette and Brian insisted this wasn't like their son. They pushed for a search, emphasizing that he'd been stranded and disoriented. By afternoon, phone data showed Brandon hadn't been near Lind at all, but nearly 25 miles northwest near the town of Taunton, close to the Lincoln County line. That revelation completely changed the search area and explained why his parents had never found him. By mid-afternoon, search teams and volunteers were combing the area. They found Brandon's car in a shallow ditch off a gravel road northwest of Taunton. The car was undamaged, and the keys were missing, suggesting he had them when he left the vehicle. Search dogs followed a trail from the car, down the road, then across fields toward the Yellow Medicine River, the same water Brandon mentioned hearing that night. When they reached the riverbank, the scent abruptly vanished. For days, volunteers, deputies, and specialized teams searched the area, on foot, with ATVs, boats, and horses. Divers combed the river. The terrain was rough. Steep banks, tall grass, and muddy soil made progress slow. At first, many feared Brandon had tried to cross the river in the dark and drowned, but no trace of him was ever found. Not his clothes, not his wallet, not his keys or phone. Over the following weeks, the search area grew wider, across farmland, drainage ditches, and wooded areas. Still, Brandon was nowhere. The case drew statewide attention. How could a young man disappear completely after being on the phone with his parents for nearly 50 minutes? Investigators proposed several theories. First, accidental drowning. He may have fallen into the Yellow Medicine River and been swept away, but divers and sonar found nothing. Second, exposure or disorientation. He may have wandered for miles, eventually succumbing to the cold. That night, temperatures dropped to 39 degrees Fahrenheit, about 4 degrees Celsius. But if that were the case, searchers expected to find something, and they didn't. Other ideas emerged. Some suggested he was picked up by a motorist, maybe someone with bad intentions, but there was no evidence of another vehicle nearby. Others wondered if Brandon had fallen into an unmarked well, a sinkhole, or an abandoned structure. Hazards common in western Minnesota's farmland. Searches using ground-penetrating radar and aerial scans were conducted in 2010. Still, nothing. To this day, not one piece of physical evidence has been recovered. In total, searchers covered over 122 square miles of terrain, using drones, infrared cameras, and cadaver dogs. One dog tracked a scent nearly 3 miles before losing it again, suggesting Brandon may have crossed the river successfully and kept walking. If that's true, he might have been alive for some time after the call ended. But where he went next remains unknown. For Brandon's parents, the uncertainty was devastating, but it pushed them to act. In the months following his disappearance, Annette and Brandon Swanson became advocates for missing person legislation. Their work led to Brandon's Law, passed in 2009, requiring police to respond immediately when an adult is reported missing under suspicious circumstances. It ensures no family has to wait while valuable time slips away. Over the years, countless theories have surfaced, but none bring closure. Perhaps what makes Brandon's story so haunting is how ordinary that night seemed. He wasn't running away. He wasn't in danger. He was just driving home, and then, gone. His final phone call, calm, confused, and ending so suddenly, remains one of the most chilling parts of this mystery. More than 15 years later, Brandon's story still echoes across the empty fields of western Minnesota. A quiet reminder of how quickly the familiar can turn into the unknown. If you have any information about the disappearance of Brandon Swanson, please contact the Lyon County Sheriff's Office, because somewhere out there in the silence of that May night, the truth still waits to be found.